All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the absolute most thrilling, hold-your-breath space disaster stories in human history. We're talking about a moment when human ingenuity and just sheer bravery were tested to their absolute limits in the unforgiving void of space. We're going to look at the terrifying crisis of the Soviet space station, Salyut 7. It's this wild story of system failure, fierce geopolitical rivalry, and a rescue mission that seemed mathematically and physically impossible. So grab your notebooks and get comfortable because the details here are absolutely fascinating. 27,000 kilometers per hour. Just let that sink in for a second. Imagine a 16-meter-long, multi-ton metal cylinder just hurtling through the pitch-black darkness of space at 27,000 kilometers an hour. And the scariest part? It was completely uncrewed and flying totally out of control. It had completely strayed from its orbit, and every single option ground control had to regain command had failed. It wasn't just a broken machine anymore. It was basically a rogue, high-speed projectile in orbit. Which brings us to the ultimate, high-stakes question. How exactly do you catch a dead, flying time bomb? Because that is exactly what Salyut 7 had become. A massive, silent, geopolitical ticking time bomb. It was tumbling, totally unresponsive, and an uncontrolled re-entry into Earth's atmosphere was looming on the horizon. Someone literally had to go up there and catch it. But to understand why both superpowers cared so deeply about this silent metal tube, we really need to rewind a bit and look at the world they were living in at the time.
Section 1. The Cold War Space Race, a 1970s and 80s rivalry.
Flashing back to the 70s and 80s, the intense drive to outdo the other nation led to incredible, world-changing innovations. I mean, things we use every single day, like GPS, the internet, advanced jets, all have roots in this period. But that fierce competition also drove some extremely perilous, high-risk space missions. Both nations were putting these smaller, temporary space stations into orbit for research. The US had the Skylab program, and the Soviet Union had the Salyut program, and the competition to see who could keep their crews in space the longest was intense. Actually, they were so fiercely opposed that they literally refused to use the same terminology for their highly trained personnel. The USA called their crews astronauts, while the Soviets totally rejected that word, insisting on cosmonauts. Every single detail was a battleground for dominance.
Section 2. A station out of control. A power failure in orbit. Okay, to really grasp this crisis, look at how fast things escalated. To keep up their space dominance, the Soviets launched Salyut 7 in April of 1982. Now, what made Salyut 7 special was its two docking ports, one front, one back. This meant two spacecraft could attach at once, allowing for simultaneous crew rotations and supply runs. And at first, things went amazingly well. In May 1982, a crew arrived, set a staggering 211-day world record, and even deployed a 28-kilogram communication satellite straight out of the station's trash airlock. But that success didn't last. By September 1983, disaster hit with a fuel leak. Then in 1984, the crew left, putting the station in an unmanned autopilot mode so ground control could monitor it remotely. And then, the ultimate nightmare. February 1985, total unrecoverable loss of contact.
Now, before we get into that total blackout, I really want to emphasize that September 83 fuel leak, just to show how insanely dangerous this environment is. The cosmonauts noticed zero pressure in a fuel tank. Well, in the vacuum of space, where there's zero atmospheric pressure, even a hole the size of a needle will aggressively suck everything out of a spacecraft. They found a spot of leakage on the outside. So, to fix it, ground control had to launch a totally separate spacecraft just to bring up extra crew and specialized tools. They had to pull off a highly complex, highly dangerous welding repair right there in the vacuum of space to patch the hole. It was an amazing save, but the relief was painfully short-lived.
Because here is the crucial breaking point. February 11, 1985. Months after the crew left the station on autopilot, ground control noticed an electrical surge in the fault logs. Contact dropped. The team scrambled, activated the secondary comms, and contact was briefly restored until a second, massive electrical surge hit. And then, total silence. Every single communication link was severed, and to make a terrifying situation even worse, the dead station experienced an uncommanded orbital shift. It had gone completely rogue.
Now let's look at the geopolitical chessboard here. When the United States learned this 16-meter station was flying dead, they saw a massive opportunity. The American objective was to use their space shuttle's cargo bay to physically capture Salyut 7, bring it back to Earth, and basically become global heroes.
The Soviet Union could have theoretically done the same, but their Buran space shuttle was still unfinished. So, facing the very real prospect of their greatest rival capturing their prize station, the Soviets were backed into a corner. They had to execute a desperate, high-risk manual rescue mission using a tiny spacecraft just to salvage their national pride.
Section 3. The dangerous manual docking. A high-stakes mission.
Just think about what this rescue actually required for a second. Normally, docking in space relies on automated mechanisms to align and connect everything, but Salyut 7 was totally dead. No power meant absolutely no automatic docking. They had to send humans up there to do it entirely by hand, relying on their eyes, their reflexes, and just raw nerve. So, on June 6, 1985, a two-man rescue crew launched in a Soyuz spacecraft. But this wasn't your standard loadout. Since they were hunting a dark, silent object in the vastness of space, they packed highly specialized, almost military-style gear. They brought laser rangefinders to calculate the distance to the station, and, knowing they'd likely have to execute this maneuver in the pitch-black shadow of the Earth, they even packed night vision goggles.
Let's break down this incredibly precise maneuver because, honestly, a single miscalculation here meant instant death. Step 1. They located the silent station and tracked it using the laser rangefinder. As they crept closer, they noticed the solar panels were completely misaligned, a huge red flag that the electrical systems tracking the sun had totally failed. Step 2. They had to manually align their spacecraft and, using thrusters, exactly match the dead station's tumbling rotation. Only when these two massive objects were spinning in perfect, deadly sync could they move to Step 3, inching closer and forcing a manual dock. And, miraculously, they pulled it off.
Section 4. Inside the frozen station. Survival horror.
So, they caught the flying time bomb, but the orbital chase? That was just the prologue to a claustrophobic survival horror scenario. Nobody knew why Salyut 7 died, or what was waiting on the other side of that airlock. They popped the hatch, and boom, they're hit with a blast of brutally cold air. Conditions inside were horrific. No power meant no heat. The interior had plummeted to negative 150 degrees Celsius, way beyond what it was designed for. Everything was covered in frost, pitch black. Air testers showed high carbon monoxide levels, meaning there had been an electrical fire. But the biggest threat was actually carbon dioxide. With no air circulation, the air they exhaled just hovered around their heads, creating this lethal bubble of CO2 that made breathing agonizing. They had to take turns. Only one guy could work inside at a time. And they were on a ticking clock. They only had 8 days of food and water, maybe 12 if they severely rationed. So 12 days to fix a station that could easily take weeks just to diagnose. So, the cosmonauts start furiously troubleshooting this frozen electrical system, literally racing against starvation, freezing temps, and suffocating air. And what did they find? The ultimate anticlimax. The culprit that killed this massive, multi-million-dollar space station was just one single broken battery sensor. This tiny sensor was supposed to prevent overcharging. When it broke, it effectively told the system to stop charging altogether. So the station kept running, completely drained the batteries, and systematically shut down every single system until Salyut 7 died entirely. But human ingenuity is an amazing thing. These guys worked tirelessly in the dark and the freezing cold. They managed to replace the faulty sensor. Then, they manually pointed the external solar panels back at the sun. And in an absolute miracle of engineering and endurance, Salyut 7 came back to life. The lights flickered on, the heaters kicked in, the air started circulating. The dead station was resurrected, and it actually went on to serve for another entire year.
Section 5. Final fate of Salyut 7. After the rescue.
The immediate rescue was obviously a staggering success. But what happened to this tough little station after it was brought back from the dead? Well, it wasn't quite done making history. During that extra year of life, the Soviet Union finally launched their highly anticipated, much larger Mir space station. Salyut 7 technically wasn't needed anymore, but they kept it up there anyway, and they used it to break yet another world record. A crew pulled off an unprecedented, direct station-to-station transfer, traveling straight through space from the new Mir station over to the resurrected Salyut 7. Ultimately, though, geopolitics caught up with Salyut 7. In 1986, they pushed it into a higher 475-kilometer orbit to save it for future use. But history had other plans. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. With the political structure completely dissolving, funding dried up and attention shifted entirely away from the aging station. Its orbit steadily decayed. Finally, later in 1991, the empty Salyut 7 made an uncontrolled re-entry into Earth's atmosphere, breaking apart into fiery pieces and scattering over South America. the definitive end of the Soviet Union's final Salyut station.
And that leaves us with a pretty provocative question to reflect on. We just saw immense bravery, unbelievable engineering, and the absolute limits of human endurance inside that freezing dark station. But when you look at the sheer, terrifying reality of a tumbling, 27,000 km/h dead station, you really have to ask, was the intense, unyielding competition of the Cold War truly worth pushing humans into these extreme, life-or-death risks in the vacuum of space? It's a deep question about the price of progress and pride, and I'll leave you to ponder it. Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer. Keep that curiosity alive, and I will see you next time.